4. Interludes. In the new year of 1860 Voigt published a book entitled, My Action Against the Allgemeine Zeitung. It contained a stenographic report of the court proceedings and copies of all the written statements and other documents brought forward in connection with the case. All the documents were quoted in full and with perfect accuracy. However, apart from all this, the book contained a rehash in still greater detail of all the old nonsense about the vagabonds Voigt had previously published in the Bieler Handelscourier. Marx was described as the leader of a band of blackmailers whose members lived by so compromising people in the fatherland that they were compelled to purchase the silence of the band. Not one letter, but hundreds of letters have been sent to people in Germany threatening to denounce their participation in this or that revolutionary action unless a sum of money specified was sent to a given address by a certain date, declared Voigt. That was the worst, but by no means the only libel against Marx published in the book. Although Voigt's story was thoroughly mendacious, it was so mixed up with all sorts of half-truths concerning life in exile that a fairly exact knowledge of the details was necessary in order to recognize its dishonesty immediately, and naturally, the German Philistine was the last person in the world likely to be in possession of such detailed knowledge. The book therefore made a great sensation in Germany, and it was welcomed with enthusiasm by the liberal press. The National Zeitung published 2 long leading articles on the basis of Voigt's statements, and when a copy of the paper arrived in London towards the end of January, it created tremendous excitement in the Marx household, and Frau Marx in particular was deeply shaken. As no copy of the book could be obtained in London, Marx hurried to Freiligrath and asked him whether he had received a copy from his friend Voigt. Freiligrath was deeply offended and answered that Voigt was not his friend and that he had not received a copy of the book. Although Marx was always unwilling to bother about answering scurrilous attacks upon himself, no matter how vile they might be, he realized that this time an answer was absolutely necessary. And even before a copy of Voigt's book arrived in London, he decided to sue the National Zeitung for libel. The paper had accused him of a number of criminal and infamous actions before a public whose political prejudices made it inclined to believe anything against him, no matter how monstrous it might be. Though owing to his 11 years of absence from Germany it had no facts at all on which to judge his personal character, he felt that quite apart from political considerations he must bring the National Zeitung to book for defamation of character out of regard for his wife and children, and he reserved himself the satisfaction of making a literary answer to Voigt. Marx first of all proceeded to call Blind to account on the assumption that the fellow actually held proofs against Voigt, but was unwilling to produce them out of the personal consideration which one vulgar democrat owed to another. Apparently Marx was wrong, and Engels probably came nearer the truth when he declared that Blind had invented the details of Voigt's alleged attempts at bribery in order to make himself important, but that when the affair had become uncomfortable he had decided to deny everything stoutly, thereby involving himself more and more deeply in contradictions. On the 4th of February Marx had an announcement published in English in the Free Press which called untrue the statements of Blind, Hollinger and We that the anonymous pamphlet had not been printed in Hollinger's plant. It also declared that Karl Blind was an infamous liar, adding that if the latter felt himself injured he could seek recourse to the English courts. Blind was not such a fool as to accept this challenge, and he tried to defend himself by publishing a long statement in the Allgemeine Zeitung strongly condemning Voigt and again imputing bribery to him, but denying that he, Blind, had written the pamphlet in question. Marx was not content with this, and he succeeded in hauling We before a magistrate and securing from him an affidavit to the effect that he, We, had repagged the type of the pamphlet for reprinting in Das Volk, that he too had recognized Blind's handwriting in the corrections on the galleys, and that his first statement had been enticed from him by Hollinger and Blind, the former having offered him money and the latter future favors. With this Blind became liable to proceedings under English criminal law, and Ernest Jones offered to secure his arrest on the basis of We's affidavit. But he pointed out that once an information had been laid it would be impossible to go back on the matter, and that if any attempt was made to compose the affair afterwards, he, Jones, as a lawyer, would be committing a punishable offense. Out of consideration for Blind's family, Marx did not want the matter to go so far, and he sent a copy of We's affidavit to Louis Blanc, who was Blind's friend, together with a letter explaining that on account of Blind's family he, Marx, would be very sorry to have to lay an information against the man, though he thoroughly deserved it. This letter had its effect, and on the 15th of February, 1860, the Daily Telegraph, which had in the meantime repeated the scurrilous libels of the National Zeitung, published a notice to the effect that one Scheibler, a friend of Blind's family, had in fact been the author of the anonymous pamphlet and not Blind. The maneuver was transparent enough, but Marx let it go at that because he had won his point and cleared himself of all responsibility for the pamphlet. Before launching his counterattack against Voigt, he made an attempt to bring about a reconciliation with Freiligrath, to whom he sent a copy of his own statement against Blind and a copy of Wie's affidavit, but he received no reply. Despite this rebuff, he made another attempt to convince Freiligrath of the importance of the Voigt case for the historical vindication of the party and for its later position in Germany. He did his best to dispel any resentment which Freiligrath might have harbored against him and declared, "If I have offended you in any way, I shall be glad at any time to make amends. Nothing human is foreign to me." He was, he said, quite able to understand how extremely unpleasant the whole thing must be for Freiligrath in his present situation, but he, Freiligrath, would realize at least that it was not possible to keep his name out of the affair altogether. We are both well aware that for years each of us in his own way, from the most unselfish motives and subordinating all private interests, has held aloft the banner of the class la plus laborious et la plus miserable above the heads of the Philistines. And it would be a petty crime against history if we were to drift apart now on account of trifling matters due in any case to misunderstandings. The letter closed by expressing the warmest feelings of friendship for Freiligrath. Freiligrath accepted the hand of friendship which was extended to him, but not quite so warmly as the heartless Marx had offered it. He declared that in the future as in the past he would remain loyal to the class la plus laborieuse et la plus miserable, and that he would gladly maintain his old relations with Marx as a friend and a comrade, but, he added, "I have had nothing to do with the party now for 7 years. I have never attended its meetings, and its decisions and its actions were agreed upon without my participation. In reality, therefore, my connections with the party were broken off long ago. We were never in any doubt about it. It was a sort of silent agreement between us, and I can only say that I still feel that I was right. My nature, like the nature of any poet, needs freedom. The party is a cage, and it is easier to sing outside it, even for the party, than inside it. I was a poet of the proletariat and of the revolution before I became a member of the Communist League and of the editorial board of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. In the future too I want to remain independent, to belong to myself alone and to order my actions as I think fit." Freiligrath's old dislike of the routine of political agitation expressed itself again in this letter, and it even caused him to see things which had no existence in fact. The party meetings he had never attended and the party decisions and actions which had been taken without his participation, had in fact never taken place at all. Marx pointed this out in his reply, and after he had once again done everything he could to dispel all possible misunderstandings, he referred to a favorite saying of Freiligrath in the words, "The Philistines are on us," will always be a better slogan for us than to be amongst Philistines. I have explained my attitude frankly, and I hope that you are in general agreement with me. I have also tried to clear up the misunderstanding that when I refer to the party I mean an organization which died 8 years ago, or an editorial board which broke up 12 years ago. When I refer to the party I do so in a historical sense. Marx's words were both conciliatory and to the point, for in a historical sense the two men belonged together despite all differences. Marx's attitude did him all honor, for in view of the villainous attacks which Voigt had made on him, he might reasonably have demanded that Freiligrath should openly dispel any appearance of solidarity with the traducer. However, Freiligrath contented himself with renewing their friendly relations, and for the rest he maintained a reserved attitude which Marx henceforth facilitated by avoiding as far as possible any mention of Freiligrath's name in the matter. A discussion with Lassalle in the Voigt affair ended differently. Marx had last written to Lassalle in November of the previous year in connection with their dispute in the Italian question, and, to use his own expression, its tone had been very blunt. Lassalle had not replied to this letter, and Marx assumed that it had wounded his feelings. But when the National Zeitung attacked him, Marx naturally felt the need of some connections in Berlin, and he requested Engels to smooth things over with Lassalle, who was after all a first-rate fellow compared with the others. This was indirectly a reference to a Prussian assessor named Fischel, who had introduced himself to Marx as an Erkatite and offered his services in connection with the German press. Marx sent greetings to Lassalle through Fischel, but Lassalle refused to have anything to do with the incompetent and ignorant fellow who, irrespective of how he may have conducted himself in London, belonged to the literary bodyguard of the Duke of Coburg in Germany, a man who had a deservedly evil reputation. Shortly after this Fischel met with a fatal accident. Before Engels had been able to comply with Marx's request, Lassalle himself wrote explaining his long silence with lack of time and demanding energetically that something should be done in the deplorable Voigt business which, he declared, had caused a big sensation in Germany. Naturally, those who knew Marx would not be deceived by Vogt's story, but those who did not might very well be impressed because it was cleverly supported by half-truths which the less discerning might very well accept as the whole truth. Lassalle was not prepared to acquit Marx of all responsibility in the matter because he had accepted such serious accusations against Voigt merely on the word of a miserable liar like Blind. Unless he was really in possession of some proofs against Voigt, Marx should begin his defense by withdrawing the accusation of bribery against Voigt. Naturally, he, Lassalle, was well aware that it would require a great measure of self-discipline to do justice to a man who had been guilty of such monstrous and baseless slanders. But Marx must nevertheless give this proof of his good faith unless he wanted to render his defense ineffective from the beginning. And then Lassalle objected strongly to Liebknecht's activities on behalf of such a reactionary paper as the Allgemeine Zeitung, as they would cause astonishment amongst the general public and indignation against the party. When Marx received this letter he had still not seen Vogt's book and was therefore not in a position to realize the situation fully. But it is not difficult to understand that Lassalle's suggestion that he should begin his defense with an amende honorable for Voigt did not please him, particularly as he had more reliable evidence of the latter's Bonapartist intrigues than the vague statements of Blind. Nor was he able to agree with Lassalle's severe condemnation of Liebknecht's connection with the Allgemeine Zeitung. Marx was certainly not a friend of this paper, and whilst the Rheinische Zeitung had existed he had fought it energetically, but as counter-revolutionary as it might be on other fields, it at least opened its columns to various points of view with regard to foreign politics, and in this respect it enjoyed a privileged position in the German press. Marx therefore answered somewhat ill-humouredly that the Allgemeine Zeitung was just as good as the Volkszeitung. He would sue the National Zeitung for libel and write an answer to Voigt, but in the introduction he would make it clear that he didn't give a damn for the opinion of the German public. On his part Lassalle then took the irritable words of Marx too seriously and protested against a democratic paper like the Volkszeitung being mentioned in the same breath with the most disreputable and shameless rag in Germany. In the main he warned Marx not to begin proceedings against the National Zeitung, or at least not before he had himself answered Voigt, and concluded by expressing the hope that Marx would not feel hurt by his letter and would accept an assurance of his honest and warm friendship. Lassalle's hope was ill-founded. In a letter to Engels, Marx used the strongest terms about Lassalle's letter and even recalled the official accusations which Louis had brought to London, though he did so in order to show that he had not harbored any precipitate distrust against Lassalle, and that despite these official accusations he had not changed his opinion of him. However, in view of the caliber of the accusations, Lassalle was unable to see any particular merit in Marx having ignored them, and he revenged himself in a dignified fashion by writing a fine and convincing description of the self-sacrifice he had shown and the services he had rendered to the workers in the Rhineland during the worst days of the reaction. Marx did not treat Lassalle as he had treated Freiligrath, and Lassalle's answer was different. He gave Marx the best advice he could give him, and he did not allow his willingness to assist him to be affected by the fact that the advice was ignored.